Greetings gamers, Tim Kirk here again. Please forgive me for any static. The Nexus apparently is just got that issue with the microphone, and it appears to be most of the Nexuses of this generation have a little bit of static. I've been trying to find a better video camera to record these on. Unfortunately, I have not found one that is affordable for me that I think would be of the quality I'd like to have. If I do find one, I will swap from the Nexus to one of those, simply because it's easier to do stuff on my big computer than the Nexus, and the camera on it is terrible. I bought it for $4. You can't really argue with it having a bad picture because it's $4. Anyway, second to that, let me encourage you, if you have a significant other and they want you to go get your hair cut at a cosmetology school, you just say no. Because this is not how short I wanted my hair. My hair does better when it's a little longer than this. And it's not, the sad thing is, it wasn't even the cosmetology student's fault. Her teacher was the one who came over and decided to finish my hair for me. And she cut it a bit shorter than normally I would. And not to even disparage, cosmetologists in general. My sister went to school to be a cosmetologist at one point, and she's always done a fantastic job on my hair during the time when I asked her to do it rather than go pay for a barber. But unfortunately, she doesn't live nearby anymore because I have moved, and I don't want to necessarily pester her time even if she did live nearby, so I normally go to a barber. Last time the barber also messed up my hair. It happens, but I won't be going back to that barber because he cut my hair before, and after you do it the first time, you should generally get a little bit of a feel for that person's head. At least listen to what they have to say. When I say I want a short, fairly businessman-like cut, it does not mean I want short and spiky. More like a football player or something. Which, nothing wrong with those haircuts for those people, but I have a big head, and my hair this short just makes it emphasizes how big a head I have, and that is not necessarily something I want to do, enormous head coming at you. Anyway, so I'm being a little silly today, but I'm going to talk about gaming now. One of the things that I want to address is I've been playing Atomic Highway for a while, running it for my friends. This is the second Atomic Highway game I've run. I was about to say the third, but it's actually the second. And I've noticed at a certain point, it just starts getting repetitive. Any game, after a certain point, starts getting repetitive. And generally speaking, that's a time to finish the campaign, let the player characters wrap up any plot threads they have, and end it. And the primary plot thread all my player characters have been focused on in this game has been the villain Fang, who started out as a minor threat that actually managed to take out one of the player characters. The player character didn't die, they managed to stabilize him in time, but he did do a number and nearly killed the player character. He put him to dying stage. And so they've pursued him despite having worse villains they've run into, but they found this one and grabbed on with their teeth, and I'm like, okay, fine. So I have made him become more of a mover and shaker, as they have driven him to make choices he probably wouldn't have if they just left him alone. If they just left him alone, he probably never bothered him again. But they didn't. They kept hunting him down, and so now he's angry and gotten more powerful. But it's going to wrap up fairly soon, I hope. I hope they don't decide to go a completely different direction, but if they do, that's fine. That's cool. However, because it's approaching wrap up, I don't necessarily want to add new player characters to it. I also have had some change out because one of my players has started having to work late. Another player has her kids fairly often, and because of all those, they don't necessarily want to spend their time playing a game when that's their little bit of free time. They'd rather spend it with their family or loved ones, and that's cool. I get that. I'm certainly fine with that. So, we skip a week, and the people who still want to play might want to play something. So, I tend to have a fill-in game. In this case, I was going to run Dungeon World, but my printer is currently out of sorts because it's out of ink, and ink is quite expensive for the printer. It's 8 years old, but the ink has not dropped in price. I don't doubt it ever will, because they probably used it for the whole generation of printers that came out with this one. And until I have money for printers, I'm not going to be able to print out all the material they need for Dungeon World, because I'm not making them handwrite moves and handwrite, their character sheets for that when there's so much of the rules material on the actual character sheet. So instead, I want to do something D&D-like, just because it's simple and I can throw things out there and they can have fun and characters can come and go. So I picked my next best option, D&D Cyclopedia. This is a combination of the basic, expert, companion, and master set. It does have a touching of immortal elements, but it's not really got the immortal set in it. It also has bits of the Mystara setting, rules for kingdoms, rules for skills, rules for weapon mastery, rules for making characters, monsters. It's a complete in one book version of D&D, and I mean it has everything you need to play for years and years and years and years and years. And it wasn't very expensive when it came out, which was $19.91. Again, it's a substantial book, and it's easy. It's relatively the simplest version of D&D I've ever owned. Now, that being said, one of the reasons I like it, and I flip-flop back and forth on this, is race as class. Elves in this game are basically elven fighter magic users, and that's the only rule written option they can be. Now, that may sound bad because I also like class as a separate thing from race, but in reading this and reading some old materials for this, I have begun to realize that this was the default option, not the only option. And I know that some of the OSR, the old school Renaissance or old school rules, whatever you want the OSR to mean, has basically done some optional things. I know Adventurer Conquering King has like 2 elven classes and 2 dwarven classes. And there's slightly different takes on elves and dwarves. But D&D did that already. They did. They just didn't write it up as rules and include it in the core book. There are cases where NPCs are different classes. In fact, there was a module I was reading and was like, wait, this isn't the default class for this race. It's a mage and not a fighter mage, because they're not fighter mages, they're actually more like samurai ninja, which was the Rakasta in the Rage of the Rakasta module. I've also seen mentions of elven clerics. And I thought about this at length. It very might have been a mistake. They could have been aiming to write for, first or second edition and had this material and said, no, we have enough for first edition, let's do something for basic D&D. And swapped it over and didn't catch every reference. Or maybe the person who was writing the rules wasn't as familiar with basic, expert, companion, etc., the cyclopedia version of the rules. And they wrote it that way anyway. But one of the things it points out to me is that any race can be any class. It's just the default adventurers you're generally going to see are elven fighter mages, dwarven fighters, halfling scout / thieves. And that's just what you're going to, see most of the time. You're not going to often see elven clerics. That doesn't mean they're not possible. It just means that you're generally going to have to decide what for your campaign works for an elven cleric. Maybe your elven cleric worships a specific immortal, maybe a specific god, and if you don't use immortals as a concept, and that god is specific and needs specific things, it's up to you to write it up. And that's one of the things that I like about basic D&D, is it's always, even with this fairly decent sized rule book, has been about creating your own stuff. It encourages you to create your own stuff. I mean, the stuff in here about campaign running and changing the rules, very good, very solid stuff. And it's one of the reasons I enjoy it. Now, that being said, there are some things that I think later editions of D&D did well. I like second edition for kits. I thought they were a good idea. I did not think kits, for the most part, should have been a player character-oriented aspect. That is, I don't think it should be for the player to decide what kits they get to be. No, kits should have been something the DM set up in the world, saying, okay, here are the kits that fit the region you were starting in, or here are the kits I'm allowing for this world. And you may pick one, pick a character type that can be that kit. And the other options are entirely, out. You can't do those. Because a kit is basically a set of proficiencies and non-weapon proficiencies and small bonuses that add to a class to customize it to fit certain flavors. In that, a barbarian is just a fighter, or even a wizard. There's a barbarian wizard version that is savage and primitive. But works for me, makes sense to me, so I liked kits. 3rd edition, I like Roll High because it makes things a lot simpler and easier to explain to people who've never played D&D before. It also allows, I like the combination saving throws, but I want to add a caveat to that. See, the combination saving throws to me were a really good idea, where there's only 3 and certain classes get higher bonuses in one or the other. But it changed the nature of character classes and their roles in combat against certain monsters. For instance, dragons. I believe, now I might be wrong, but I believe in 3rd edition the saving throw for Dragon's Breath is reflex. Which comes to be a slight problem because the one who's going to be up front, in front of the dragon, where the Dragon's Breath's going to hit, is going to be the fighter. Yes, he has more hit points. Yes, he'll probably have a fairly decent reflex save too if he's high enough level, but if they examined old versions of D&D, they might have realized that there was a reason these things were split out. Because certain classes are better at certain saving rolls to perform certain roles in the game. In the fiction of the world, the fighter is the one who runs up and takes the dragon toe-to-toe with a sword and a shield, or a two-handed sword. He's the one who's going to stand there. On virtually every cover of D&D has a warrior, dragon. Basic did. Original 1st edition didn't, but, there are quite a few pictures of art in the books, on the books, with a warrior standing there going toe-to-toe with a dragon. And the others, the thief is sneaking in the background, the cleric is getting ready to protect everybody with spells, and the mage is back there muttering to himself, because he's casting spells as well. So that seems to me that the best save for the fighter would be against Dragon's Breath. But he's not always going to be best against those kinds of attacks. So over time, I've kind of moved away from liking those 3 saves. The 3 saves are a brilliant idea. Don't get me wrong. They were a good way to condense the game system down. But then they messed it up by adding a whole bunch of other stacked up stuff. So I feel that this version of D&D is probably the most optimal for the kind of D&D play I want. Very simple. It's been re-released on PDF, both the Cyclopedia and the creature catalog that adds, I think, like 100 more monsters. And there's plenty in this book. I can probably run for 2 or 3 years without ever repeating a creature using this book and having a game session every week with different monsters. So it's not like the creature catalog book is necessary, but it is out there in PDF. It's fairly inexpensive compared to some PDFs that I've noticed of late. I also have noticed that Shadowrun 5th edition has come out, which someone gave me very kindly. They paid for a PDF copy because I had to go to download it off RPG Now. And they gave me a PDF of that, so I'm going to be looking over it and deciding whether in the future Shadowrun I will use 4th edition, 20th anniversary, or 5th. But the PDF was $20, and it's a little beyond what I'm willing to pay for a PDF. So, I'm appreciative that somebody gave me the PDF, but I don't know if I'm going to be buying the book after reading it. But the D&D ones are cheap, relatively speaking, so grab them, look through them. Maybe you'll find something you like, want to carry to your 3rd edition Pathfinder games. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll find a game you entirely love and find so simple and elegant like I did that you keep going back to it when you want to play D&D style games. Rather than, playing something more complex that doesn't really get, that core quickly. I don't know, but enjoy your gaming, and I'll be back hopefully in a week to talk about you more. Talk about me. Talk about gaming. Whatever. If you do have subjects you want covered, and I can cover them, you're certainly welcome to send me a video or write me a note on YouTube, and we'll see what we can do about covering some other topics. Thanks. I'm glad you're here.